Every shift ended the same way. Her feet hurt, her smile was forced, and her mind was already worried about the next problem that hadn't happened yet. She was a waitress who lived on tips, and fear followed her everywhere. Not loud fear, quiet fear, the kind that whispers "what if" when you're trying to sleep. What if she got sick? What if the restaurant cut hours? What if her car broke down? None of those things had happened yet, but they controlled her life anyway. She didn't need to get rich. She didn't dream about luxury. She just wanted to feel safe. What finally changed her life wasn't a raise, a new job, or luck. It was one simple rule that most people ignore and almost everyone underestimates. Before we continue, like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps this message reach people who live with constant financial fear. Now stay with the full story. Her name was Laura Bennett, and she was 29 years old. Laura lived in Phoenix, Arizona, in a small apartment with beige walls and furniture that came mostly from thrift stores or hand-me-downs. Nothing matched, but everything worked. That was how she described her life, too. She worked as a waitress at a casual diner just off a busy road. The place was always loud, plates clinking, coffee pouring, customers coming and going without noticing the people who served them. Laura worked 5 to 6 days a week, sometimes double shifts when someone called out sick. Her income changed every month. Some weeks were good, tips were generous, the restaurant was full. Other weeks were thin, slow afternoons, empty tables, short checks. That uncertainty was what haunted her. Laura could survive on little. She was used to it. She didn't spend much, didn't chase trends, didn't live beyond her means. But she lived without a buffer, and that made every small problem feel like a threat. Her car was old. Her health insurance was basic. Her schedule depended on other people showing up. At night, after long shifts, Laura lay in bed replaying worst-case scenarios in her head. What if the restaurant closed for renovations? What if she twisted her ankle during a rush? What if rent went up again? She wasn't dramatic, she was realistic. The fear didn't come from imagination, it came from experience. In the past, one unexpected expense had sent her into weeks of stress. A car repair she couldn't delay, a medical bill she didn't plan for. Each time she survived, but the recovery took months. Laura paid her bills on time, but just barely. Her checking account hovered close to zero more often than she wanted to admit. Saving money felt like a luxury reserved for people with steady salaries and predictable lives. People told her, "You should save for emergencies." She wanted to laugh. With what money? Every dollar already had a job. Rent, utilities, food, gas. There was never anything extra. And when there was, it disappeared into the next problem. Laura didn't want wealth. She wanted peace. She wanted to go to sleep without scanning the future for danger. She wanted to work her shifts without carrying constant tension in her chest. She wanted to feel like one bad day wouldn't undo her entire life. What she didn't realize yet was that safety doesn't come from high income. It comes from preparation. And the thing that would finally give Laura peace wasn't complicated investing, budgeting apps, or financial advice meant for people with perfect circumstances. It was one quiet rule, a rule designed not to make you rich, but to make you unafraid. Laura's biggest problem wasn't low income. It was exposure. She lived completely open to risk. Every dollar she earned went straight into the present moment. Nothing stood between her and the next unexpected expense. No barrier, no cushion, no delay. That meant every surprise became an emergency. A slow week at work wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. A car noise wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. A mild illness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a threat. Her life was balanced on the edge of nothing going wrong. And nothing ever stays that way. The breaking point came late one night after a closing shift. Laura was driving home when her car made a sound she had never heard before, a sharp metallic knock, followed by a warning light blinking on the dashboard. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't panic, not outwardly. She had learned how to stay calm in moments like that. But inside, the familiar spiral began. How much will this cost? How many shifts will I need to cover it? What bill will have to wait this time? At the mechanic the next day, the answer was simple and brutal. Nothing catastrophic, just expensive enough. Laura nodded while the man explained the repair. She nodded again when he named the price. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She went outside, sat in her car, and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. It wasn't the money that broke her. It was the realization that this fear would never stop unless she changed something fundamental. She had been living responsibly, but not defensively. She had focused on surviving each month instead of protecting the next one. That night, she searched for answers, not for ways to make more money, but for ways to feel less afraid. That's when she came across a concept so simple it almost felt insulting. An emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of basic expenses. Money that exists for one purpose only, when life doesn't cooperate. Laura almost closed the page. It sounded impossible, unrealistic, something people with stable careers talked about. But one sentence stopped her. An emergency fund doesn't make you rich, it gives you time. Time to breathe, time to decide, time to respond instead of react. That idea stayed with her. Laura realized her real problem wasn't that emergencies happened. It was that every problem became urgent the moment it appeared. She didn't need more control over life. She needed a buffer between herself and chaos. And for the first time, she saw that peace wasn't about avoiding problems. It was about being prepared for them. Laura learned the rule in a way that finally made sense to her. An emergency fund wasn't about saving a huge amount of money. It was about building distance between you and disaster. The rule was clear and unromantic. Save 3 to 6 months of your basic living expenses. Touch it only when something truly unexpected happens. Not for vacations, not for wants, not for this month is tight, only for emergencies. Laura didn't start with months. She started with days. She sat down with a notebook and wrote the bare minimum it took to keep her life running. Rent, utilities, food, gas, insurance, no comfort, no extras, just survival. The number surprised her. It was lower than she feared. That was the first relief. Then she divided it. 1 month felt impossible, so she aimed for 1 week. Just 1 week of life protected. She opened a separate savings account and named it in her mind, Not Touch. No card, no easy transfer, no temptation. Every tip night, before spending anything, she put a small amount into that account, sometimes $10, sometimes $25, on good nights a little more. The amount didn't matter. The rule did. She treated that account like insurance, not investment. It wasn't there to grow fast. It was there to exist. Some weeks were slow. On those weeks, she didn't save. She didn't punish herself. She just didn't withdraw either. The fund moved in one direction only, up. Slowly, something shifted. Laura stopped checking her bank app every few hours. She stopped calculating disaster in her head before falling asleep. She still worked hard, but the fear no longer sat in her chest all day. After 3 months, she reached her first real milestone. 1 full month of expenses. She stared at the number longer than she expected. That money didn't make her feel rich, it made her feel shielded. For the first time in years, Laura felt like life could hit her and she wouldn't immediately fall. She kept going, not perfectly, not obsessively, consistently, because the emergency fund wasn't about optimism, it was about realism. Life breaks things, people get sick, jobs change, cars fail. The rule didn't promise to stop any of that. It promised that when it happened, she wouldn't face it alone. And that promise changed how Laura walked through the world. The first real change didn't show up in Laura's bank account. It showed up in her body. She noticed it one morning while tying her shoes before a shift. Her shoulders weren't tense. Her jaw wasn't clenched. She wasn't running through worst-case scenarios before the day even started. The fear that had lived quietly inside her for years had begun to loosen. Work was still unpredictable. Some days were slow. Some shifts were exhausting. Customers were still impatient. Tips still varied. But the stakes felt different. When a slow week happened, Laura didn't panic. She adjusted. When a bill came in higher than expected, she checked her emergency fund, not to use it, but to remind herself it existed. That reminder alone was powerful. Her saving wasn't dramatic. She didn't suddenly cut her life down to nothing. She didn't become obsessed with numbers. She just kept honoring the rule. When she could save, she saved. When she couldn't, she didn't go backward. The fund grew quietly. 2 weeks of expenses, then 3. Then a full month became normal instead of miraculous. One afternoon, her manager announced the restaurant would close for renovations for 10 days. In the past, that sentence would have sent her into immediate stress. She would have counted bills, borrowed money, delayed payments. This time, she went home, made dinner, and slept. 10 days without work were still inconvenient, but they weren't catastrophic. Her emergency fund covered it. Not forever, not comfortably, but enough. That moment changed how Laura saw herself. She wasn't fragile anymore. She had margin. That margin also changed her decisions. She stopped saying yes to every extra shift out of fear. She chose rest when she needed it. She turned down bad situations because she could afford to wait. Even her relationship with money softened. She no longer treated every dollar like it was about to disappear. She handled money calmly, deliberately, not emotionally. Laura realized something important. The emergency fund wasn't just protecting her from emergencies, it was protecting her from desperation. Desperation forces bad decisions. It keeps people stuck. It makes every problem feel urgent. With a buffer in place, Laura gained something priceless: choice. She could choose how to respond. She could choose when to say no. She could choose not to live in constant fear. Her life didn't become easy, it became stable, and stability gave her something she hadn't had in years: room to breathe. Laura didn't stop working hard. She didn't suddenly earn more. She didn't escape uncertainty. She didn't turn her life into something perfect. What changed was something quieter and far more powerful. She stopped being afraid. The emergency fund didn't remove problems from her life. It didn't prevent slow weeks, broken cars, or unexpected bills. Those things still happened, but they no longer controlled her. Laura understood now that fear doesn't come from problems themselves. It comes from having no space between you and them. Before, every issue landed directly on her chest. There was no buffer, no delay, no time to think. Life hit, and she absorbed the impact fully every time. The emergency fund changed that. It created distance. Distance between surprise and panic. Distance between inconvenience and disaster. Distance between stress and collapse. That distance gave her clarity, and clarity gave her peace. The moral became simple, grounded, and impossible to forget. An emergency fund doesn't make you rich, it makes you unbreakable. 3 to 6 months of basic expenses wasn't about comfort or luxury. It was about dignity, about knowing that one bad week wouldn't erase years of effort. Laura no longer measured success by how much money she had. She measured it by how calm she felt when life didn't go as planned. And that calm changed everything. She slept better. She chose better. She trusted herself more. She stopped living in reaction mode and started living with intention. Years later, Laura would still work in restaurants, but she would work from a different place. Not fear, but stability. Not desperation, but choice. And if this story feels close to your own life, remember this: you don't need to predict every problem. You don't need to avoid every risk. You just need time. Time to think, time to decide, time to breathe. That's what an emergency fund buys. Not wealth, peace.